watch these people because they're the best in the world at what they do. And if you can't learn from the best in the world at what they do, you're not paying attention. Can we start a podcast?
Let's do it.
All right, Tim. that was our intro. Can we just start our podcast? All right, Tim. What's up, my dude? We're podcasting.
What's up, Josh? How's it going?
Good, man. Good. I want to say I'm tired. I feel like that's not a good way to start a podcast, to be like, I'm tired. But the last podcast we recorded with Jon, because I can say this because I said it on there, I was about to run to an airplane. Like I literally just hopped on a flight within an hour of clicking stop record. And this was my first flight with kids, which is awful. And then I came back last night and, we're doing it this morning. I don't know. It's just, it's been a lot. This must be how you feel, Tim. This is the traveling a lot, showing up. It's not easy. Now I get it.
Dude, I think our lives are pretty crazy for sure. I'm pretty tired all the time. I'm definitely very, very tired right now. One of the more, I kind of like log them by podcasts, like how I feel week to week, like how tired I am. Cause like, I know my energy level when I pull on, I'm like, okay, like pull onto the podcast
that
and
was
like
great.
feel like I can feel it when I'm like about to, cause you're about to go on air and like talk for a couple of hours. But also I do want to point out that I think all our listeners are probably really tired from their lives, and it might be nice to just like, actually I have a question for you. When you're climbing and you're like going to a climbing session or like outside, is there any trick that you have or like anything that you do to, when you're tired or like when you're like less stoked for the sesh, but you got to send? Do you have any like tricks or anything that you go for?
Oh, dude, you just reminded me that I did not bring a pro tip today. But
it's okay. I got one.
I mean, music works like a charm. I think I've even seen studies show that music can change your mood, right? So don't always listen to music to fit your mood, but maybe you want to change your mood. So I listen, Tim, it's so funny. I have been listening to all these angsty metal like songs from the 90s and like things like, I don't even know if you know who like System of a Down is and Slipknot and all this stuff.
Dude, for sure. I listen to all this stuff too.
So I've been using that for my workouts because sometimes you are tired, and if after 5 minutes, 10 minutes of just warming up and moving around and listen to that stuff, you kind of get a little psyched. And actually I would say this goes for the podcast too. I remember when we did one, who'd we do one with when you had just flown back from Japan and you were just wrecked? Was it Carlo or was it? No, it was Tristan.
Oh yeah, it was Tristan. Yeah.
So you were just wrecked, dude. Like, before you came on the
I was
pod,
in Vegas too.
You were texting me, you're like, Josh, I'm just wrecked, dude. But then the thing is that once you just start, I mean, even now, 2 minutes into our recording, I get a little dump of adrenaline. I'm like, I want to be here. So seeing people, being around my friends, that just kind of gets me into the zone. So I've only had a few times where I've really felt wrecked and then just kind of never recovered or never gotten psyched for my session. So I don't know. Maybe I don't have that problem.
That's awesome.
Perma-psyched to climb. Yeah,
I'm kind of the same way. I think as long as I get over the first hump of like putting my shoes on, I think it like ends up being okay. But sometimes that's hard. I think as a kid, I definitely had like a lot of Red Bull, or like definitely would turn the music like super loud. I have songs that like make me not even just like, I listen to like hard stuff too, but like sometimes I just have songs that make me feel good and like happy. And sometimes that's enough. But for me, I definitely lean in towards like the following night of sleep. Like the following night, if I like know that my day is rough, I look forward to that following night of sleep and I try to take it more seriously because then my next day is probably going to be better.
Yeah.
But we're tired.
No, I'm psyched now though. I actually remember, and this goes into something that you often talk about, where don't let your mental state determine your chances of success. Exactly. Like be a little more objective. And I always think about that thing you said where, wow, like that hold feels bad, but that doesn't mean that your hand's going to blow like that. Of course it's a bad hold, and just do the move. Like you should do the move, like lean into the stuff you can control. Right. So I remember
awareness, resilience, make the decisions.
Boom.
That's the process of climbing.
I will share this one time that really blew my mind where I was just wrecked. I was so tired. I had, had a big weekend or week before, was climbing on, I don't know, my normal schedule. rolled out of San Francisco for like a 7-hour drive on Friday to be in Bishop, climbed all weekend, came back at like 2 in the morning Sunday night, or I guess that's like Monday morning. Go set Monday morning. I just remember because I was like in the car with Mark and Max, and when they dropped me off at 2 in the morning, it's like I'm gonna see you guys in like a couple hours. Like just yeah, I've spent the whole weekend with you. I'm gonna see you in like 5 hours, and setting is tiring. Forerunning was tiring. Of course, I should have gone home and just gone to sleep. But then I can't remember who showed up. Someone showed up and they were psyched to session, and I was so wrecked. And then I just kind of warmed up, and then they were psyched. I got psyched. I had an amazing session. But if you look at the like objectively, there was no reason why I should have a good session. But I
Right.
don't know. Sometimes your emotions can change, and sometimes you actually have a good session and you're really psyched. So maybe your fifth day on, you feel bad, and that's when you send your project, right? Like who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. Sometimes those like when you're aware, you're like, well, I shouldn't have a good session. You start to like forget about that and you don't think about those things anymore. So it allows you to think about things that you can't control even more. Where you're like, well, I for sure shouldn't. I'm 6 days on. Like, definitely had a bad night of sleep, but I'm like, well, I'm here. I'm gonna do. If I'm gonna try this move, it's like, oh well, this feels all right. Like, I guess I could do this, and then you end up sticking moves that you like maybe projected for a while, and you're like, okay, I guess I don't know much about my capacity or like what I'm capable of. And I think yeah, I've had plenty of sessions like that. It's awesome. With Brennan and Danny, definitely we like come back from a trip and then like, all right, see you in the morning, like see you later. It's so awesome. And then we go to the next day and then just stay at the gym after work and like session. It's so awesome. Like that's the climbing for you. Is like you can have fun no matter what, regardless of your outcome, regardless of like what you need out of a session. You can just still have fun. And I think that ultimately amounts to the most gains anyway.
And sometimes you just have to change your type of sessions where I no almost no matter how tired I get, I often can marshal my forces for one hard move, but sometimes I just run out of gas and doing a hard boulder. So it's like, okay, let's go on the spray wall and just try to do one hard move. Or you've talked about doing slab climbing where you really focus on your feet and seeing, just doing those kind of tricky moves over and over again where do you really need to be at peak strength performance? Like, so
Right.
what if you're a little tired? And or you could take the approach that Jon Cardwell told us last time when conditions are bad. He said, "Oh, instead of it being 14C, it's just going to feel like 14D," which I thought was hilarious in a very. It gave insight into how strong he was. Where he just said, "It's not going to be a 14C today; it'll just be a 14D." And I've never thought that, Tim. I've never been okay with thinking that 14C was just going to be 14D that day. But it just shows you how strong that guy is.
Yeah, that was really fun to have him on, and you could just hear about his just depth of climbing resume on sport. Like he just had so many sends, and I mean, I just don't know what that feels like to be honest. Like I know I'm capable of sending hard, and I have sent hard, routes, not the hardest routes out there, but like I know if I spent time to go out there, I would feel happy about my progress or like how I would go for it and whatever, and maybe be happy with the result. But that's totally different than having the result over and over and over again, just like going for it every time and making sure it happens. And it's cool to hear like someone like that who's gone through it and then still learns things like, 10 years deep into that process where he's like, oh, but then I came across, this one and like, this is what I learned. It's like had a different training approach. I'm like, that's crazy. Cause like, these are the things that I kind of run into in the training gym, as a kid, but I didn't expect, someone who was like, I'd known about Jon Cardwell for like probably 9 years straight, just, watching comp things, like hearing things on the news or like magazines and like even hearing today, essentially like hearing his recent experiences. I'm like, wow, that's like some of the same stuff. You're just going for it every time though, like anyway. And that's what amounts to success. It's awesome.
Yeah, I feel like we didn't talk enough about how Jon is really one of the best American sport climbers we've ever seen. I remember poking around on 8A, and he has a lot of 515 sends under his belt. And I don't, I, let me think about it. J Star has more 515 sends under his belt because J Star is an absolute animal. And I think it might only be Daniel Woods has more
Wow.
515s. I looked around. I thought maybe Joe Kinder, maybe Ethan.
Matty Hong.
Ooh, I didn't see Matty Hong on 8A. I don't think so. He actually might be right there with him. But yeah, 4 or 5 515s in America, or American sport climber, is unheard of, really. And just
Yeah.
definite, to use Tristan's word, definitely a tier one sport climber there. And I just feel just so privileged. He does kind of have this under the radar vibe. I think it's just because he's just he's he's soft spoken. He's not,
Mm.
arrogant, and he's just out there trying hard, like you're saying, day in and day out. And it shows. And I also think the other thing that's interesting about him and his style is that he has this really good endurance, that power endurance, that kind of classic European limestone, 40-meter hang on forever. And we don't have a lot of American sport climbers
Hmm.
like that. There's J Star, but we are more boulderers, for better or for worse, and maybe that'll change. But he has that style that I think is somewhat unique in America.
Yeah. We also have less of those climbs for them to like go out and do them on, so they shine a little bit less in like the local, I don't know, online scorecards that people see. But then also, like, I think personally, I feel that media is very much more geared towards boulders, and people who, I think people who enjoy media tend to immediately enjoy boulders more. That could just be from like the way that it's portrayed in media. But to be fair, I think seeing like someone post a 15A route, I would have to be in a specific mindset or place to like want to watch it. But boulders are like, oh wow, stunning. Like you just see like someone post a V13, someone post a V10, someone post a V12, someone post a V17. It's like, oh, dope. Like they're all just cool, like,
My attention
and they're immediate.
span,
You can see them.
yeah, my attention span is about 20 seconds, maybe 23. It's like my anaerobic focus is is only there to watch boulders. I can't watch routes. I mean, when you see it on Real Rock and they do a cool job of cutting it. I don't know if you seen Seb on DNA. I thought that was a pretty cool little
Yeah,
segment.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty mega. So it's funny because
Yeah.
I actually think that route climbing feels more badass, but somehow the video does not capture what it's like to be sport climbing compared to bouldering.
It needs the storytelling. It needs the context. Like I think Chris Sharma's like, I mean, I watched definitely a lot more Chris Sharma sport climbing than I watched him bouldering, I think, like in older climbing movies, or at least like what I was excited to watch. And Adam Ondra for that matter. And like, I don't know, I feel like La Dura Dura, that like that type of climbing film was like, I think underrated for people's hearts, where they watched it and they were probably like, wow, that was like thrilling. Like that was stunning. And it's because you can like really have that battle across an entire route multiple times. And like, that's totally possible in bouldering as well, but it's probably for every route is kind of like that. Like every route at someone's max is always going to be like that. It's always going to be some crazy dramatic battle, but it has to be captured and it has to be like story told. I remember like when we were trying to film Bad Girls Club, that was actually really hard, because I had a friend like drive out from Berkeley or Oakland, Davis, I think. He drove all the way to Rifle to meet us out because I was getting close on Bad Girls Club. Filmed us for like 2 weeks, and I didn't send it. I fell on the last move. I think on his trip, I think I fell on there at least like 10 times on the last like 4 holds on Bad Girls Club. And I think that story was interesting, but he just didn't really, I think, understand how to make it into a story for people to enjoy. And it's like that's really hard. Like that's really, really hard to like make a good film that's like, all right, well, this is the crux and this is how it goes. And like, explaining all that context, I think, and then showing the footage in a way that makes that context clear for viewers, I think it's just much, much, much easier in bouldering. And people are like, wow, I get how hard that looks. Versus in roots, it's probably just as interesting, but it's never shown, I think. That's
Falling on the
personal. That's a personal thought.
Yeah, falling on the last move
Yeah.
is brutal. That's no fun. I have spent some time on trips with pros, and it sucks having that pressure to send and not sending. I guess we did a whole podcast on this, but I know that it's really difficult to have whole camera crew set up, to have people in your face swinging around, and then not sending. And it's I don't know. It must be weird to be cameramen too and go to places.
Yeah.
And I know a whole crew that like flew out to Spain for a specific climb, and the climber was unable to do it, and it was kind of, I don't know, there's this weird awkwardness. Like, how do you feel as a professional climber if
Yeah.
you? Yeah, I mean, do you have any insights in that? Because it sounds
Dude,
like I know. Yeah, it sounds like it's happened to you.
I
Kind of.
definitely didn't I definitely didn't address it, I think, as much as I should have when I was younger. Like, because Bad Girls Club was probably, I think, 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe like 4 years ago now. And I definitely back then was just like going with it. And I was like, yeah, it's no big deal, like whatever. And obviously on the route, something would happen, like someone make a noise or something. I'd be like, oh, that's unusual. It's like, I don't really realize what that does to my focus, you know? And I think that was my mistake in not addressing that. And so over the years, I've definitely like had more conversations and addressed more of it and just been like, okay, what am I okay with and what am I not okay with? And like, how do I communicate this? Or literally just thinking about it and allowing it to like pass through my head versus like, go straight over my head, but then it ultimately hits me in the chest when I don't want it to. And I think it's really important to like just digest all the things. It's exactly like that performance under pressure podcast, what we're talking about. And by the way, it's a lot of where it comes from is like having the pressure and then being like unhappy with how I dealt with it and then overcoming it at a certain point or on a different experience and being like, wow, like all it took was like addressing the experience for myself and then, digesting how I felt about it and then making my choices anyway. It wasn't like I'm going to make my choices and like try not to think about this stuff. It's like, no, you're going to think about this stuff first, do all this stuff and like deal with it, see how your opinions are with it, take some time to clear your mind about it, and then make your choices anyway. It's like, it's unrealistic to think that you're going to block those things because they're going to hit you in some form. And, you can be really practiced in that, but you're more likely not going to have enough like experiences like that to like practice through it. You'd rather just deal with it and then make your choices afterward anyway. It's just like, exactly what you were saying, a couple of minutes ago. It's like, oh, it holds bad. And like, oh, but I got to try anyway. It's like, no, that holds bad, but it can allow me to do this and I should do this. Right. It's like still a rational way of thinking versus like just reacting to it where it's like, oh, I don't like it, but I can try
Yeah.
hard. It's like,
I
that doesn't amount to much success.
I think this topic is endlessly interesting because I think it's actually what people feel when they pull on more often than we all talk about. Whether
Oh
you're a
yeah.
pro or a beginner, there's a pressure. And yeah, we did a podcast called it. Tim, it wasn't called Performance Under Pressure. I gave it the very catchy title of Do or Die because
Oh,
I don't know,
nice.
it just sounded more hardcore because you're doing stuff that's super dangerous. Anyways, y'all can check out that podcast we did. But I do love that topic. But I want to talk a little bit more about Jon because I just again just lucky to get someone like that on to share some of their insights and something that I think is interesting when we're talking about these really high level people is that they still have plateaus and they still struggle to send. And we don't talk about that often. And that is kind of that storytelling behind the video that could be on sport climbs. And we don't really talk about that. And I gotta say, it probably doesn't make the best media that you want to see on, the Real Rock premiere or whatever, but it is cool to hear about behind the scenes and how they work through it. It's useful for people like us who are trying to level up and understanding that no matter what level you are, you have failure and how do you deal with it? And hearing about Jon going to Super Crackanet and not sending, and then his insight that he was in shape but not in the right shape, and his desire to go back to literature and to understand how he could train so hard but then not be in the right kind of shape. It made me think of two really distinct things. First of all, hard climbing, really hard climbing, 515 climbing is super hard. I know it sounds obvious, but it just shows you that it's even someone who is as experienced as him with lots of 515s under his belt and with he's 100 plus 514 hard 514. You can't just say yourself, oh, I'm just gonna show up and climb and it'll be cool and it'll be great. It's like when you really start pushing into those extreme levels, you have to seriously be prepared. And then the other thing it really showed me is just how that mindset of having that quote unquote failure and then turning it into a win. Basically, he's going to be better prepared for whatever route he goes to next because he now has another thing to address. It just shows, it's like no wonder he's so good. He's able to take a failure and make it a success, which I think is super cool. And yeah, sorry, Tim, you blanked out for a second. It got me.
Yeah, I lost you. I
Well,
lost you for a sec, but
did you hear me say cool things about how Jon is amazing?
yeah, I lost the last 15 seconds of it, but yes, Jon is amazing.
Well, okay, let me just say it one more time then, because I think it bears repeating. But I'll keep it concise and quick. Is Jon did not send Super Crackanet, and his response was to figure out how to come back stronger next time. And it goes into kind of that
Yeah.
no coach, no problem episode we did a few times ago. And I just, it's like, here's a guy at the pinnacle of sport climbing,
Yeah.
and this is what he does. And so are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
doing that? Are we doing that when we have failure? Do we figure out how to move forward and be better the next time? And because we need to, because otherwise we're never going to get to 515. Maybe you
Yeah.
will.
I love, yeah, I love that. I mean, yeah, it's hard because sometimes I'm like, man, that's such good stuff. But like, I definitely, yeah, I have a lot of the same processes and like thoughts in my head about, my own climbing. But also, it's just fun to hear it from like somebody else, and I haven't done it. Like it's different to feel capable of doing it, and like, you know, and yeah, I think maybe more relevant for our topic today, but like competition training and like your year of competition climbing is not necessarily conducive to outdoor results. And like time outdoors is just time outdoors. So it's fun to hear someone with a similar like thought process and like approach to climbing, but had a completely different experience over their years. And, the time that they put on rock amounted to X, Y, and Z experience, perspective, and result. And it's just cool to hear it, like it's something that I very much want to go towards at least a little bit of my life.
Well, anything else from Jon that really hit home? Actually, because I said that anaerobic, I thought that was really interesting when he started talking about Daniel or Chris or Dave Graham and
Right.
this natural abilities and just it's always fun to hear pro climbers talk about other pro climbers and what makes them unique. And that was one of the things he said. He said, "What makes you unique? What makes pro climb? Gosh, how am I saying this? The unique top level climbers are unique because they lean into that uniqueness and they show up in this interesting way." And Daniel Woods with his just I always use this term overpowering with him and just that depth of reserve of power in boulders. I thought was a really interesting insight, and that kind of just shook me. So really fun one with Jon. But any last memories you have of that podcast that you think are worth highlighting today?
No, that was great. Those are two really good nuggets and just like good discussions that we had on that note. But yeah, I think it's really cool to hear other pro climbers also talk about their thoughts on the differences that make different pro climbers unique. And I like that the importance of that is that they leaned towards that, and that's what made them really unique and special. And to use that output on specific rock or competitions or whatever climbing that they've done. And to hear him talk about the science of it was really cool. I think like a lot of us talk about style and like choices and the experience or like how much they've climbed on whatever, but to hear the actual science and a little bit of behind the scenes in the science, I think was really cool also.
Yeah, it'll be interesting as we get better with testing, trying to
Yeah.
tease
Yeah.
out these different specialties that athletes have. Because even though we have things like lattice where they test finger strength or contact strength, it's just it really doesn't capture the exact strengths that we're seeing. And Dave Graham's always a good example of that. Where if you put Dave Graham through lattice, do you think he's gonna blow everyone away with his I don't know lattice score? It's like no, but Dave Graham has been putting up V15 after V16 after blah 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 forever. He's
Right.
the freaking man. But how do we understand that metric? And so yeah, it'll be interesting to when we get our little climber stats, like you have a little baseball card that we can break down. Yeah,
Yeah. I think
looking
that's,
forward to that.
a little bit of insight too into like the current meta of training. I think like the current meta of training, in my opinion, is that people find, more generic exercises or like training routines or plans or like consistencies like max hangs or like, those types of things. And not to say that those things are bad or like don't amount to success, but the meta leans towards like favoring those things as opposed to like analyzing other climbers in the past who've like had a lot of success on rock or sending and like really analyzing their attributes and seeing why some things worked and why some things didn't, and like, and especially in this Daniel Woods concept, the thing that comes to mind is like overpowering movements for too long of a time is considered inefficient. It's like a really generic thought that we have is considered inefficient, but like leaning towards why that's helpful and like why that provides probably a lot of, precision, why a lot of control on specific movements that might be volatile. And honestly, probably a lot of climbers fall on movements because they're just under trying, like maybe 5% too little. and Daniel probably never falls on movements because he's under trying. So he's just amounts to sending more or like sticking more movements first try. So like I think like that was cool also to understand the other side of training mindset. Like what is actually helpful and what is not helpful for me, what's helpful for me. And I think that's just like where I've been trying to push people also towards, for clients that I've worked with or just like people who ask for generic training advice. I'm like, I think we should just do what, Jon Cardwell was saying, where like, just look at the other climbers and seeing, because you're saying like, yeah, Dave wouldn't test well on lattice, but like he can climb hard. So we shouldn't be using this like lattice test approach to say who climbs hard, right? It's like, that's just a lattice test. That's just a lattice test, right? They're good at the lattice test.
Yeah.
And that can be applied in some ways. And, going to our topic today, in the World Cups, I am seeing a lot of those things applied for sure. But to assume that doing those things makes your climbing apply in that sort of way, or to have those things apply to your climbing, that's a terrible assumption, I think. We just learn from the greats in the past or in the current, but,
Yeah.
long
No,
time greats.
no gold medals for winning the lattice test. Yeah. It's interesting what you said there about Daniel Woods and quote unquote overpowering. And the reason why we should stop using this word overpowering is because I've had this armchair pro discussion with other buddies where literally kind of make fun of Daniel Woods's technique and clearly he's overpowering things. Or Chris Sharma, God, that guy can't keep his feet on. He's just skating all over. Or Dave Graham is weak and he just like knee bars and toe hooks the crap out of everything. And boy, wouldn't it be cool if he got stronger and then he could do X, Y, and Z. But it was interesting what you're saying about Daniel. And I guess it's if you peel that next layer of the onion back, you say, okay, Daniel looks like he's overpowering things, but he's making moves less volatile. So, when you really lock off and then you're getting this next hold, if you can lock off for an extra half a second and get your index finger on that one little crystal that allows what he's doing clearly is freaking working. Clearly the guy, it's not that he has bad technique. He has Daniel technique and he's figured out something. And so then it's always this question of what can we take from that? And you don't want to necessarily say, I'm going to be like Daniel. You say, I'm going to learn something from Daniel. I'm going to learn something from Dave.
Exactly.
And then I'm going to be Tim or Josh.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's really interesting. And I thought that was so fascinating, man. I freaking love that part.
Yeah. I do think that like the current generation, I'm noticing that they're doing a little bit more of that. The kids that I see nowadays, especially the kids, there's definitely kids in the World Cup finals, the adult World Cup finals. But even those kids are, very much, I think, absorbing and maybe it's good coaching, maybe it's just good discussions. I have no idea what's in their brains necessarily, but, absorbing things that are good about, some attributes of strong climbers and, also the fact that they have really strong climbers that climb probably at the same gyms as they do constantly, and seeing like, okay, that works. But I think, and having the opinion about it, it's like, okay, I think this person's doing this for this reason, and that amounts to this success. So I'm going to lean into a little bit of this, maybe not exactly become them, but I'm going to take some of this. And you just kind of take that around from everybody that you see, but you have to make sense of it. You have to understand like they're doing this and that amounts to this type of success. It also costs this, right? And to do this, you also need this, right? That's like how the training brain should work, is you analyze, things that you see and like you make sense of things through rationality and then make your decisions.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you because I love what you said.
Yeah.
With this, they're doing this thing and that works, but it costs this. And this is kind of what the thing is Daniel Woods is doing this thing and it's working and it's costing something extra, but maybe in a domain where he has extra to give. So
totally,
it becomes, where do you have extra to give? What makes you special and unique? And there is something, because everyone is interesting. So you understand what Daniel is doing, and there may be certain moves and certain things where you have that extra reserve to enact that thing you learned from him, but you can't be Daniel because Daniel's Daniel.
Totally.
And I think that's cool. So you mentioned youth climbers right there. And before we started actually clicking record, you've been just loving your work with youth climbers lately. And so I just kind of wanted to, you just lit up when you said that it's been so fun. Yeah. And so I'm just wondering, how's your coaching been going, Tim? What's making you smile about working with them lately?
Yeah. I mean, so unfortunately that just means that a lot of my adult coaching has been slowing down. And, if you guys are listening and you're my clients, you definitely know that it's been hard to reach me and get time with me. But yeah, it's because I've been, putting time into my own climbing as well, my own life. My life's been, pretty crazy lately, but also the youth coaching. So nationals for youth is coming up. So I had a couple of youth athletes that I coach fly into Salt Lake City, and I've been working with them, calling it little training camp. We called it Camp Salty, just Salt Lake City, but a little joke. So the kids call it Camp Salty. But yeah, I've got a wide variety. I've got this kid Vale Everett who actually competes very similar level as I do. He's definitely going to beat me at probably most of the competitions I start doing from here on out. He's a freak. He's a freak kid. He's extremely strong. He's 17. I have another kid from St. Louis. His name's Will. And then I have two of Vale's younger sisters. And so I have a really wide variety of kids that I've been coaching. I've really been loving just learning them and seeing, their ups and downs, their try hards, and when the reasons they don't try hard. And I think it's just like more interesting to work with like really raw young athletes who don't have everything like opinionated yet, and trying to like give them opinions and seeing what happens out of that. And then adjusting like, well, pressure amounts to this. And like, I think having more conversations with them because they're so open to like, I mean, they're opinionated, they're definitely at that age where they're like, well, this has worked for me. And like, this is what works in, my opinion. But then I'm like, what about this? Let's like think about this way. Right. And they trust me because I've had a lot of experience, maybe not, the most success out of, comp climbers or, because they're all comp athletes, but like comp climbers my age, maybe they're more successful ones, but I'm the ones like here willing to share with them. Like there aren't that many relevant comp climbers who are coaching. So I think that's why they trust me. But yeah, it's been really fun to just like share my thoughts, like super raw, and like see what they make out of it. And generally, like I think adult clients kind of receive that and then like make sense of it and then try something. The kids really go back and forth. The kids like really go back and forth, like ask questions and like really try to make sense of it, try really hard, and they get really frustrated, right? Like the kids get extremely frustrated, feel all sorts of like pressure and expectations from themselves. And I think that's really fun to like go back and forth with. It's something that I also like relate with myself, right? Like that's definitely something that I felt a lot over my teenage years and definitely like somewhat recently. And just like being the person who they can bounce off of, I think is really, really interesting to me. But everything we've ever talked about on the podcast, everything that we're talking about today is relevant for them, and even more so, I think, and more pivotal. Like they're much more colorful and like where they go up and down. And I think that's really fun to like just see. I don't feel like I have control over it necessarily either. Like allowing them the opportunity to grasp their opportunities and like make use of it, change it in their ways, I think is like really, really, really fun.
Kids get deeply frustrated. I think one of the things that
Yeah.
I just like kid athletes in general because I think they actually try harder than adults. I always remember being a kid and trying so hard or just getting so exhausted too where your head touches the pillow and you literally pass out. Kids will just leave it all on the table. I think it's because they don't have to worry about driving
Mhm.
home. Even they don't have to worry about paying bills. This is just their whole being. And with that said, you get really frustrated when you are trying something and really trying it and
Yeah.
failing, and your coach is telling you to do something and you're literally giving it all your effort. And I remember, dude, well, I mean, I can say this because I was really young, but especially in gymnastics, there's tears, man. I would cry. It's like you're
Yeah.
like,
Oh
I
yeah. Yeah.
can't do it. I'm trying.
Right.
Like I'm listening. I'm trying. I just don't know. And
Right.
you know, uh, coaches play a big role in kids' life. I think it's great that you work with kids and love it because I think they play a huge role in our lives, and
Yeah.
it's meaningful when I think back to those times.
Yeah, I want to share something because you said that kids just try, like harder than, anybody. And I want to pick that apart a little bit because I agree in some aspects where I think kids can try harder than almost anybody I see, but they often don't. Like kids, I think that's why coaching is so like I don't know, opportune for kids because you see them with immense potential, right? Like when they're raw and try really hard and want it the most and things click and they don't get distracted by things or feel certain pressures and make decisions off those things. They absorb everything, right? So if they feel something negative that induces negative things, their output would be negative. But if they don't have that, everything is positive. Everything is like 110%. And so that's why I say they can try harder than almost anybody, but they often don't. And so it's really, I think, good coaches can funnel it so that they are their raw selves all the time. So when you see a kid that's like their raw self all the time, it's like you're seeing the most incredible thing, the thing that is the most unbelievable. I actually find that adult clients of mine try, very quickly to like 60, 70, 80%, but maybe don't even understand or forgot like what that 100% felt like, a long time ago. So I have this like, back and forth read where I'm like, the kids have like 110% potential, but often get to like 40, 50, 60%. Whereas the adults have like, more in like that average try hard is like, it's more accessible for them, because they just like expect to try hard and like understand that feel, but maybe don't tap into like the exact raw, like, well, I got to put it all out there. You're right in that they have like different values and different priorities and things like that. Kids don't really think about that type of stuff as much.
Mm. Well, this is a good little teaser lead in. We're going to talk about the World Cup season, the bouldering World Cup season, and kids are definitely more drawn towards competition. And it's just kind of interesting. Yeah, it'd be surprising to me if you told me you had a youth athlete that you're training that wasn't interested in competition. I think that's
Mm.
a big switch, since I was a kid. I mean, there wasn't, I don't know. Competing was a big thing for me when I first started. Part of that was because I came out of gymnastics where there was no doing gymnastics other than competing. Like no one was just going to jump into a random open gym and do some swings on a high bar. It was you were you were competing. That was what the game was about. And in fact, all gymnastics comes down to doing a routine of the skills that you learn. So it's interesting that when we're talking about kids, we're really kind of talking about competing and ideally in World Cups or the Olympics and winning. And Tim, we didn't talk as much about the World Cup comps this year. And I actually want to kind of talk about why that might be. Why are we not as obsessed with it? And it's it is the direction our youth are being funneled towards, right? That doesn't mean that they don't split off and decide to go to different places, but it's something that is really relevant to our sport because that's what the kids are being funneled into when they go a team and then they get taken out to comps. And I guess before we leap into that, I still want to talk about, I want to see if you can just summarize, is there anything that you've just seen in these kids in the past, couple of weeks or month that you think is something that is just consistently an issue, or you see often in young kids that you wish they would address before coming to see you, or something that you just keep, I don't know. What am I saying? A common mistake that a common mistake you see in youth climbers.
Man, I think that's a great point to lead us forward to. But I do think that exactly what you're saying as the thing that makes them kids is the thing that holds them back the most. So kids want to win more than I think anybody. Kids just want to win more from like the raw heart more than anybody, and it's why they just like go for it. It's also why they get really frustrated because they care so much. And when they don't necessarily know how to make sense of why things go poorly, that's also frustrating. And that's so much more frustrating in my opinion, because you don't necessarily feel like you could have done better. Sometimes climbing is that kind of sport where, if you don't know exactly what you are doing, you don't exactly know what fell apart. So you then don't know where to adjust. I think kids like really run into that frustration. So a lot of my coaching for kids is to allow them to make sense of like why failures might happen, like why mistakes might happen in climbing, and how to address that, because that's what bouldering rounds are, right? That I mean, sport climbing is a little bit different, but it's a kind of a similar approach. But bouldering rounds are like trying, having an opinion about what you think is best on the wall, trying it 100%. That's like a really clear step that I think a lot of kids skip, and then making sense of what just happened, and then dictating what your next attempt is. Because if your attempt was perfect, obviously you flash the route, or you just cannot do it, and you should make sense of that as well. You try 100% this one beta, you knew that it was the best way. You should probably just walk away, right? Like, there's no reason to try it for 4 minutes straight if you think that that's your absolute right. So kids, you see that all the time too. You like in a 4 minute round, you'll see the kid get to the same high point 4 times in a row. And it's like, dude, I think we all would have known that you weren't going to stick the next move. And like, yeah, while that's maybe a not optimistic mentality, it's kind of real. And that happens quite often. And we should like know how to dissect that and like, objectify it for ourselves to make decisions off of. So I think kids' decisions come from a place of emotion more consistently than they come from an
Mm,
objective place. So teaching them like how to seek objectivity in their analysis or in their instinct, right? When you see something, it's like, well, I feel like this is going to work the best way. Why? Tell me why, right? Tell me why it's the best way, right? And then you fall again and you're like, okay, what would be better? Why? Right? Like the kids don't necessarily like when you ask them why, they usually tell you from a feeling. They usually tell you, well, like I felt like this is what it felt like this feels better than that. And it's like feelings are not objective, right? Like that's not necessarily a poor place to use from, but it's definitely the most common thing I hear from kids. So like the thing I just teach is balance, right? Like we want to go heavily towards feelings in terms of our decision making, but then we also want to go heavily towards objectivity. So we make choices, right? It's not so much to like, understand what's better and worse because that just depends. It depends on your, feeling that moment, how much endurance you have left, how much capacity you have left, how strong you are, and then like what your read actually ends up being. So those things change and it's just about your decision making based on those opinions, right? But
yeah,
again, opinions can come from feelings, but they should come from objective places a lot of the time.
that really makes sense that kids are more feeling based. It's hard to
Right.
be able to deconstruct climbing and be objective. That does come with experience. And it's interesting when you talked about these like this balance between both ends of the spectrum, because I think we often talk about it. You do want to listen to your feelings in the sense that you want to build an intuition so that you can climb unencumbered and make snap decisions, because you can't always take a step back and be objective. But the way you do
Right.
that is by following your feelings, having feelings, because you can't not have them, but then being objective and saying, why did this fail? And then answering that in a cold hearted manner, a non-judgmental,
Right.
non-feeling manner, and then trying to build your intuition now with that new objective knowledge. And so I think it's a
Exactly.
continual bounce between them. I just hit my
Yeah.
mic trying to show that you're bouncing back and forth.
So
Cool.
yeah, but I also want to say that because you're asking for, what's a consistent thing that I critique, but a consistent thing that I see that's really, really successful in kid climbers that I do not see in adult climbers is more of them, like more often I see an average youth climber commits way harder blindly. And I think that's really important in rock climbing, right? Because in rock climbing, we don't necessarily like I just said, you should make sense of things, but that shouldn't dictate your ability to make a decision, right? That should just be used in supporting a decision, right? But kids often skip that part and go straight to the decision and say, well, I might as well try to commit for this because I don't really know. I don't really know what the other way is. So you see kids like blindly commit and often end up to more success more often. You see the constant like, well, the youth team could flash this one. It's like I hear that from members all the time at gyms. Like, how do they flash it? Like, do you understand why they flashed it or like how they did it? It's like they're not that much stronger than you, but they're for sure committing like way more than you are. So that is one thing that I wanted to address, that kids definitely blindly commit way more. And like trying to maintain that, trying to like make sure that kids maintain that for the rest of their lives is really, really important for me too. But then like guiding it towards like, again, like, okay, you blindly committed this time, but can we aim it a little bit more, right? Like what would you change? What would you change in your thought process or your literal beta and like the things you think about during the movement to make sure it's more consistent? But that blind commitment, let's keep it, right? That should be number one every time.
Yeah, committing kind of important in comp climbing, kind of important in all climbing, and definitely comp climbing. And that's something I always notice when I'm watching these World Cups is just absolute commitment, especially to these
Mm-hmm.
top holds. And it just instantly made me think of this clip I saw of Brooke. I can't remember which one this was, but she was jumping to the end of a finals route, and it was not a jug, but it was like a pretty good hold, and she grabbed it too high with both hands, and she slid down it until hitting the good part, and she made that commitment, and then the hold was bad, and she stayed committed, and then latched it and was fine. But yeah, it's just cool to see people really really go for it, and it works.
Yeah.
Okay, before we
I have a
jump,
note on that, but I want to come back to it later.
okay, I want to do our announcement segments, because should
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
do these at like the beginning, but this is how we've been doing it. This is a good time for the segment. Uh, Patreon is launched. We are live on Patreon. Go find us at patreon.com/testpiece. And we're doing our first AMA live podcast. I don't know. We'll come up with some cool name for it, but basically, we don't have a specific topic yet, but we'll have a topic where you all can join me and Tim live, and we'll do a bit of a live podcast. But the big difference is that you're all there. You can say whoa, what did you mean by this? How does this apply to me? I'm, 6'3". I'm not a kid climber. And what do you mean by commitment? And so I think it's going to be really interesting to take what we do and then be able to really get that feedback. And so if you've had burning questions you want us to answer, now's your chance. It will be on July 19th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Zoom. And just as a reminder, this is only for the tier. It's a LFG. It's a Let's Fucking Go tier. Very important. Uh, and we also are doing a special thing for the launch where we're going to give the first 10 subscribers who sign up just a little extra little thing from Tim and I. You all can, if you're one of those first 10 subscribers, you can send us a video of a boulder problem or maybe even a route, probably just a boulder problem because we all talked about how much we all have trouble watching people actually climb a route. But you can send us a video of you climbing and Tim and I will do an analysis of it. And that can either be a little write up because Tim has told me that people really love getting little write ups of their video analysis. We could talk directly, maybe for a Zoom for a couple of minutes to really go over what we see, what went right, what went wrong. But just all you people who take that first leap and the first 10 subscribers to the LFG tier, we get to do a little video analysis with you. So be one of those first people so we can critique you and give you a little special a little special thing for supporting us.
Yeah, I'm excited for Patreon. I'm excited for the Testpiece podcast to level up a little bit. Josh and I had a discussion beforehand, and definitely our podcast is leveling up. And it's just a way for us to follow the wave and have you guys be more interactive and support us. And I'm excited for this video analysis thing too. I'm excited for the monthly AMAs, and I think a lot of people have. Hopefully, maybe some testaments from my clients. A lot of people have valued that type of discussion, and it's just a more accessible way of having that because I'm actually stepping away from that, and I don't want to do that, personally as much because I feel as if there's a lot to offer in a wider net, and this is just, a version of that. But that aside, yeah, video analysis is also super helpful. I think a lot of my clients tend to lean towards that more, just getting just raw opinions about certain things. Like Josh said, if you guys are one of those first 10 subscribers on the LFG category, the LFG tier 2, then you guys will get that access and you guys can just ask us, what your preferred mode of analysis is. But people really like the write-ups just so that they can study it because we use a lot of we fast talk a lot when it comes to climbing. We know a lot and, just share a lot of spray. So you guys, I guess you could either record the session or get it written down would be totally fine with me. But yeah, hope you guys find your way over there.
Video analysis, really good tool. And it's also really objective. We just talked about all these subjective feelings. And sometimes when you just put a video clip in front of Tim and I, it's just things just jump out. You just things that maybe you think everyone knows. Oftentimes it's just these giant red flags. Why would you ever do this? Why would you be putting your foot there? And it's funny because when someone points it out, oftentimes you think to yourself, I don't really know why I put my foot there. Anyways, we're psyched. We have been leveling up. This really helps us devote more time and bring on more guests and just do it better because it's been going really well. And that just makes us want to do it more because we love it, you guys. We really do.
Yeah. This leads into my pro tip. Do you have any more announcements?
Nah, man. Pro tip.
Cool. Pro tip. Watch the World Cups. This is a really easy pro tip for me. I kind of immediately, I was telling Josh that when we were kind of reviewing, I definitely did not watch every live stream or anything. I skimmed through a couple of the finals. Luckily, I did see almost every qualifier boulder, I think, through Instagram. Just a lot of, the World Cup climbers. I'm sure a lot of you guys see them that way as well. But they just post all their, best attempts or sends from the qualifying round. So it's easy to see those. Definitely didn't watch the semis, but I kind of instantly turned on the finals and found myself unable to skim through a lot of the rounds, unable to skip past certain sections of people's attempts, especially specific climbers' attempts. And I'll kind of get into that. Then I used to be able to skim through way more easily and just get the information that I wanted. But I found myself, one of two things, entertained more so than I ever have been. Well, not ever, but I used to be really entertained from the old World Cup competitions when I was younger, and just older competitions in general, like Adidas Rock Stars and the La Sportiva Legends Only, and different types of competitions where I saw a lot more raw climbing, a lot more drama, a lot more like try hard, and it did feel like a little bit of a drop off in the last couple of seasons for X, Y, and Z reasons that we might get into. But I definitely immediately was entertained, and I was like regretting not watching through the entire streams. But also, I was learning a lot, and that's been something that I've been missing from climbing media in general, is watching and learning. And I always wondered, like, am I just like getting better at rock climbing to the point where I'm not learning as much anymore? But then I go to Japan and like climb at these gyms. I go to the boulder field and like climb on boulders that I have no idea how to do or read. And I'm like learning just looking at them and like making sense of my falls and making sense of the success. And I can do that on the World Cups. So, my pro tip is trying to understand what climbers do, why climbers do what, and what works and doesn't work, and making sense of that is a super effective way of deepening your understanding of climbing theory and movement mechanics. And I think, these World Cups that I've seen so far are a really good way of doing that. You especially see climbers at the highest level compared back to back, right next to each other. You can really see that they do a good job with the camera work, and you can really see the holds. The commentators, in my opinion, are definitely good enough to give you the context. I do wish that they had more. Actually, they definitely have like more of the competitors coming on too. It seems like not always like the high level competitors, maybe because they're always in the final. But it's cool to get that insight and that context. Yeah, watch the World Cups. They're definitely something everyone should watch.
Yeah, why don't we watch them religiously? I'm just like you. Whenever I happen to catch a live stream, I'm just sucked in. I just can't turn it off.
Yeah,
I don't care if it's qualifiers, semis. Well, I guess we don't really see qualifiers too often on a live stream, but I love it. And then I always ask myself, why am I not just obsessed with this? And I don't have a really good answer. I kind of want to dive into a little bit as we get going, because it just seems like something that every climber at every gym, we should just be talking shop about. Oh my God, did you see Brooke on that boulder? Did you see Yanya came back and flashed all the finals? Why isn't this just
right.
part of our vocabulary? I don't have a really good answer, because when I watch it, I'm blown away by how good it is. Uh, but I almost think of it kind of. Do you watch? Do you watch that Drive to Survive show on Netflix? It's about the Formula One
Mm-mm.
series. So Formula One is the fastest race cars ever, and I think they're awesome. I've even been to a Formula One in
Wow.
Silverstone in the UK. It's incredible. Like, and I used to race, so I'm kind of into racing. But you would think I
Yeah,
would just
yeah.
be obsessed with Formula One. But no one watches Formula One. It's like no one actually watches it. It's kind of not that much fun to actually watch on TV. But then this Netflix series came out where they follow all the drivers around and they make all this drama and stuff around it. And I love it. It's called Drive to Survive. And it was making me think that maybe someday we'll have that for climbing, where there'll be some kind of TV around it that really help you understand the drama, all those micro things, and make it so you don't have to watch a live stream at 3 in the morning when it's
Mm,
in, across the world. But yeah, Tim, I did just come
yeah.
up with a pro tip. While
Nice.
we were talking, I went into my little notebook, and I found one that actually I think is pretty good. Really simple one, probably really applicable to people who are on the World Cup series competitors. Make sure you watch where you place your feet. Actually, watch your foot go onto holds. I can't tell you how many times people, well, first of all, people just are amazingly unprecise with their feet. They just slap their foot on randomly. And it does take power and control and strength to place your foot well. But a lot of times, it, I see people look at the foot, reach to put their foot there, and then right at the last instant they look away and their foot just kind of lands somewhere. And it's amazing that extra little bit of time you take to look and make sure your foot goes to the right spot. You don't even have to overpower it and put your foot just right. Literally just look at the foot until your foot is on there. It will make a world of difference. And yeah, this could be like a beginner tip, but I'd say I see this error. I mean, I still do this error too. So yeah, that's my pro tip.
Dude, definitely not a beginner error. I think everybody should work on their footwork constantly. But another like layer to that pro tip is because I think it's okay sometimes, like if you lose, because you're saying that it does take extra power and strength and tension and timing to like control where your foot goes. So I think it's sometimes okay to like place it poorly, but then like adjusting it to the point where it's in the right spot for a good reason, I think is like also something that's an underrated thing to practice, where like you're saying you're saying kind of that thing where like people just place them sloppily, and then that amounts to poor climbing. And I think a lot of people underestimate just the simple thought of like, why am I placing my foot, on this side of the foothold versus this side of the foothold? Like, am I pulling on it? Am I pushing on it? When do I need to pull on it? And when do I need to push on it? How hard is it to pull on it and push on it? I think these are the questions you should ask yourself when adjusting your foot, versus like, this is all I can do. Like, I got to go. You have to open your mind to like, what do I need? Not what can I do? What do you need to make sure that happens? I think is like also a really good point. So yeah, I
Yeah,
agree that precision on footwork is important, but like that can be another layer as well.
yeah, yeah. You totally made it another layer. I'm going to just say entry level. This is just entry level pro tip for, well, I guess it's not entry level when it's a pro tip, but just literally keep your eye there for the extra quarter of a second until your foot lands in there. And then, yes, listen to Tim, think about why your foot is where it is and what it's doing for you or not doing for you. But just give yourself, just wait or keep your eyes there for a quarter of a second. Even if you're just kind of slapping your foot on something and you're super tired, I guarantee you will be more precise if you wait the extra quarter of a second when your foot actually lands on there rather than looking away. And you might think that you're looking there.
Oh
But
yeah.
dude, this is the video analysis. You send us that video, and we will show you that your head turned before your foot landed 9 times out of 10.
Yep. The same for the hands too. If you're doing dead points, that eye contact is extremely important. I love that what Josh was just saying. You might feel like you have eye contact, but you probably don't. That's a good one.
Yeah. Okay. Tim, I like the World Cup too, man. I really enjoyed, I caught some of them throughout the year, most notably the ones that were closer in my time zone. But then, I definitely reviewed them on IFSC on the YouTube. And it's just, it's so fun to watch climbers do climbing. And I mean, that's the dumbest thing I've ever said on here, except for that, of course, you get to see the best of the best on amazingly hard problems and watching them problem solve and just see the the best climber. It's so amazing how whenever you see someone who is the top of the pile just do a climb just effortlessly, it is always mind blowing when you see some move that seems to stump, 5 out of the 6 finalists, and then one comes along and they make it look so easy and you just don't quite understand what's going on there. And just trying to tap into that, what are they doing with their body, what made it easier for them. And oftentimes when they do it beautifully, it's not because they figured out some crazy trick, it's just because they really they did the right beta, or they found the sequence that was simplest for them and just really lean into it. And I think it's so cool to understand that, where when you see the best of the best on the hardest problems, when they do it, you say, oh, of course, like, of course they drop knee. There was a big drop knee. Of course they did that. But seeing it and really internalizing that and why it works, I think is powerful.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's a really good point in seeing like the contrast from, at the best of the best ones compared to, pretty much everybody else. There's a huge contrast in that moment. And of course, those climbs are probably extremely, mentally taxing, scary, hard to commit to, maybe the peak of the movement that even climbers are capable of, period. And like that's a huge question mark, right? Like, how close are we to the peak of possible even movements in competitions? How close are we to that? I think is a super interesting thought, but it looks to me like pretty damn close. And seeing climbers like really operate that properly and seeing the difference in like mental poise, decision making, the timing of it, I think like has been more interesting than it ever has to me. I do want to address that. I think, for me, this discussion is really fun because it's something that, like Josh said, something that we haven't as, much been interested in talking about in the past. And I think that's just due to a lot of poor experience. I think a lot of climbers who have watched World Cups in the past may have a similar sentiment about, like watching. There's many years that I've watched World Cups and been extremely uninterested actually about, because they don't possess these attributes of like what makes them entertaining. I don't think that's necessarily the reason. You kind of brought up earlier, like, why don't we watch these World Cup? Like, why don't we obsess about them? Why don't we like go to the gym and talk about like the previous World Cup and just like the moves that we saw or like the drama that happened? And I think that's just more so due to, well, this is just a big guess of mine, but more so due to like, yeah, how the climb the competition itself is portrayed and like how easy it is to follow and like keep track of. And then also, yeah, maybe our ability to like see the actual differences. It's like pretty nuanced. I do think like some of my favorite things is to watch people analyze like different sports and like listen to the behind the scenes and like the deeper thought processes and stuff. So maybe that can exist for climbing. That's actually something that I was really interested in doing, was analyzing like other people's climbing or videos, and maybe I can do that with the World Cups. But it's also just fun. Like it's very fun to like BS about the ideas, but from a logical place to like actually make sense of why things happen. Exactly what my pro tip was, right? Like you guys should do that. But it's kind of fun to do it from like a level that I've experienced, or like for example, Sorato Anraku, I've been able to watch now like what his output looks like when he's struggling or like when he's really succeeding. And I told you that, I went to B pump and like tried a couple climbs that I knew he did. And like when I say I couldn't even like generate or like hold tension on some of the holes that he was jumping to or like jumping off of, I was like, okay, so like I kind of understand the difference in like the stick that this kid has. And so watching it, if he falls on a move that has like heavy stick, I'm like, that must be like V15. Like that's probably so insanely hard. And then under pressure and all those other things. So, I think that's all the stuff that makes it fun for me, is like really knowing that stuff. So it's hard to say. Really hard to say like why we don't go and watch those things or like why we don't talk about it. But my,
Well,
my hunch is that we don't understand as much about it.
yeah, and maybe we don't understand as much because that style isn't what we encounter on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis. It just isn't. And I don't know if gyms are going to change to do more World Cup style boulders or not. Like is this it it I mean, we have seen more World Cup style boulders, but when I see those boulders on the YouTube stream, I'm just kind of like, whoa, okay, that is not something I typically encounter. And there's something really enticing about that it's new, but also it does seem a little bit distant from my experience on like the freaking moon
Mm.
board. Uh, and I want to go more into it's Sunratu. No, Sunratu. Uh, say his name one more time because you flagged him for me.
Sorato,
Sorato.
Sorato Anraku.
Okay, Sorato was definitely someone that you flagged. You were like, dude, Josh, you got to take a look at
Oh
this
yeah.
guy. He's special. And what's weird is
Yeah.
whenever I see new climbers that are special, this is such a weird thing to say, but to me, they kind of look like kids. They kind of climb like a
Yeah.
kid. They make things look effortless. That they don't look overly powerful. They don't. He looks very different from Tomoa. Not just physically. I just mean their styles. He Clearly
Yeah.
he knows how to jump, but he doesn't overpower things. He doesn't overly muscle things. When things go well, they kind of look easy. It actually made me think of watching Annie Sanders when she won nationals and watching her climb compared to Brooke and Natalia, just the other climbers. She kind of just, I mean, she is a kid. And that brings up my other question for you is kind of, why are we seeing so many young competitors do so well in the World Cups? Is it that styles continue to change so quickly that these big names can't adapt? I mean, Tomoa still did well. I mean, I know he won Salt Lake, right? I mean, it's not like Tomoa is gone. He's just he's not dominant. And in fact, it's
Right.
hard to say any man is dominant.
Right.
But when you see these, I don't want to say random names, but Toby Richards, Sorato, Sorato, who are
Toby
these people? And then
Roberts,
they're
I
just
think.
incredible, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
why are we seeing so much disruption? There's not a lot of names that are sticking around.
So I think my read on this is maybe, yeah, a little bit controversial, but if I was a kid and if I had the same access, or and it's super easy to say this from like my perspective, but if I had the same access to the things that Sorato or Toby had in terms of like the depth of understanding of how comps even work nowadays, the whole type that you see in World Cups has been in the meta. Like obviously there are different holds, but fiberglass in general and the setting style in general has now been relevant in high level comp climbing for many years now, a couple of years, still less than a decade though. So the web of knowledge, experience, and just like trying hard in the gym is just more easily accessible to them, right? Like my experience of going to B pump, I was like, oh wow, like if I climbed here every day, I would only get better every day, right? And only deepen my knowledge of like how to even make sense of these types of movements. There were more movements that I didn't even know how to do well at B pump than I'd ever seen anywhere in rock climbing. And to have that access constantly, I think it just levels them up. But I don't think there was even a gym that could have had that, 10 years ago. Right. So like that's for one, I think that these kids just have more access to that. But then they also are very unique kids who probably try really, really hard, really creatively, and have good coaching throughout that time, and are open-minded and positive thinkers. Like all the things that make a really good athlete, they have them. And then they have a deeper, more nuanced understanding of comp climbing today because they have more access to it. And the setting is, phenomenal nowadays. Like I think a lot of the setters, even at the World Cups the last 4 or 5 years, were just like experimenting. And now they're a lot more sure. To me, it seems like, a big note that I had about the World Cups, the level in general is higher. The coordination is not gone, but the coordination seems more aimed. It seems like the climbers are rewarded not just for doing the correct sequence. The correct sequence seems rewarding in terms of like making the movements more optimal, but the climbers that are rewarded more so for fighting really hard, commitment, and creativity, more so than I've seen in previous years. And that's just allowed from good route setting. In my opinion, that's just good route setting, or that's what makes rock climbing really fun for a lot of people versus comp
Yeah.
style climbing, right? So, mhm,
I think it's so cool that you called that out, because I'm not sure I really understood that until you said that, where it does
mhm,
seem less I don't know, party trick or parkour. Like there's a couple of moves tossed in there, but it's kind of more this idea. Can you check that box? There's
right,
less of just these wild things that seem to be like 8 paddle dynos. Not like it was ever totally like that, but
exactly.
uh,
Yeah. But those were
what was it?
rewarded. If you were a climber
Yeah.
like that, you were rewarded more
Oh,
often.
oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Because what you said something, this idea of struggle, patience, creativity. It really got me when I was watching. I don't remember her. It's her last name is Seo. She's Korean. Do you remember
Oh,
who's that?
Chaehyun Seo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was more of a sport climber, right? She's an
Hmm.
amazing sport climber. And watching her boulder, I think she finally podiumed.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't remember which one, but it made me realize watching her climb that kind of patience, embracing of body positions, that methodical, really, yeah, patience. And I'll say it again, and patience and embracing body positions that you often see with great sport climbers actually is starting to deliver a lot more on the bouldering, where before it seemed more separate, where it's like, well, can you campus? And I think I see that
Right.
more now that you pointed out. It's really clicking, where there's slower movements, this
Right.
commitment in the way of, yeah, commitment not to jump, but to take your time to find the right body position, and that's cool.
Right.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so that's also brings me to the thing that I was saying earlier, where I found myself unable to like uh skip attempts. Like usually, if I watch the first climber do an attempt, I have a read on that attempt, and if I think that attempt wasn't necessarily like their ideal attempt, I'll watch the next one. And if I don't, and if I see it and I'm like, okay, I have a read on like how they're gonna look on the next attempts, and so I generally can just like skip through and probably see who's gonna top climbs or not. So it saves me a lot of time for like watching things. I couldn't do that because the climbs looked as if you could find more. And it's generally like that's sad, right? That I could watch a lot of World Cups and kind of just like guess how this climber was probably going to do throughout their whole 4 minutes, where now I couldn't. I would watch and I'd be like, maybe they have like, if they figured this out, if they went for this more, if they adjusted this, then they could. And like being able to see possible success no matter how strong you are. Like obviously, like the first World Cup, we watched Hachioji. Like Brooke looked so much stronger than the other five girls in that women's final. But still, I was like, I'm gonna watch these other girls because they look still like close to figuring these things out. And it was kind of close competition for a little bit until the style changed abruptly. And for the guys, it's very much like that. Like the movements that they're setting are very risky, but also like there's a chance to make them more consistent. It's very clear when somebody succeeds on a move, they look a lot more controlled versus someone who's kind of guessing and like things still may happen. Like that to me is what makes climbing competitions really fun to watch, is like seeing that drama unfold for the single person and then seeing how it compares to these other rock climbers that you may have opinions about. Like this person's much stronger, this person's much more dynamic, this person's, just, get better at this one thing, and then seeing the results unfold. I think that it finally was like interesting again, where like I don't know. I remember watching like a lot of the Daniel Woods, where Daniel Woods would just win every nationals. I was kind of waiting for somebody to beat him, and obviously I would kind of like root for Daniel. I'm like, he's the best, but it's also more interesting to see like I think it was the 2014 ABS Nationals where the highlights reel depicted the story of like Vasya Vorotnikov like close to beating Daniel Woods. And it probably didn't really amount to that, but that's what made it interesting. That's what made it interesting, where it's like, how is he close? It's like these climbs are kind of doable for Vasya, and Daniel honestly just kind of has to make a mistake, and then Vasya can just like, pick it up. And like, that's what makes climbing so interesting to me. That's what makes climbing competition so interesting to me. And you're right, it's the style. It's just allowing that to happen, like giving them room makes it like I couldn't stop watching. I was like, oh, like now I have to keep watching.
That's cool. And
Um,
I want,
yeah,
yeah, I want to
yeah, yeah.
pause there. First, good job, Brooke. Way to win gold there. Really, seriously,
Oh
really
yeah.
cool. It actually makes me wonder. I wanted to pick your brain on this, where American women have really come into their own. Definitely, out there making their mark on the world stage. And I think I had this belief for some reason that American men were going to show up this year and be really, really good,
Mhm.
and have their kind of breakthrough. Because I mean, it's not like the American women are completely dominating; they're just always vying on the podium. They're there, and American men aren't. And I thought Colin Duffy was going to have potential for a breakout year. I still really like watching Zach Gala. Sean Bailey has massive experience. I personally don't know how committed he is. I like literally just I have no idea if he's super committed to the comp scene. But I just like, what do you think it is that all? What do you think made the American women all of a sudden be vying for those top spots, and the American men really struggling to even make into finals?
Yeah. Um, I want to address this thought from a different place. I think so. Back to something that you said earlier, where maybe like someone isn't necessarily all just one person's not completely dominant. I actually disagree. I think Sorato Anraku was the most dominant male competitor in the entire IFSC season. He missed one final, and he was the only person who had made that many men's finals. And he actually won the last World Cup, and it seemed to be like a little bit like he was getting better and better at each one. And to me, that showed dominance. Was like by the time he got to the end, it was like it's pretty clear that he's the most consistent men competitor. He only missed Prague. He only missed Prague. He was one spot out of that final.
How old is
And
he?
so, and being 16, he's
16.
16. So it was
Jesus.
his very first season in Open. And Toby Roberts towards the end of the season, also you could see that there was a very clear difference. And this goes to my answer towards your question. To me, they looked like they had a different base level. Their base level of strength, of stick, of knowledge. Mejdi, for example, like Mejdi, Toby, and Sorato were, in my opinion, the three most consistent, the most dominant male competitors this entire season. And maybe some things didn't line up for them to like give them the best result, but if you watch them and see how their approach is to like climbing movements in competitions are extremely volatile, right? Like the way that they test you is like you were seeing there's so many like slot foot stabs, so much dual tech, so many, quick movements that yeah, mistakes can happen really easily, but their approach was in my opinion the cleanest. They really had a strong approach in picking mechanics and committing to them and making strong smart deviations, but at the end of the day, their base level for ability was just higher. I think that's just my controversial opinion. Again, I think that their base
But
level of
so
strength
why? But so
and
why, Tim?
skill,
Like, I mean, we have a training facility. I'm just pushing you to pull that next layer, because I think it would be if you and Zach Gala pretty darn well, and Sean Bailey, they're clearly some of the best and strongest climber. I mean, those guys are
yeah,
great climbers, man. They really are.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
really
and
great
and that's
climbers.
that's a really good I think like I have another perspective to bring it into because if I brought Sorato, Toby, and Mejdi to the climbs that Zach and Sean are the best on, I don't think they would stand a chance. I don't think they would. To my personal opinion, knowing them and seeing what I've seen, I don't think they would stand a chance on specific things. And we can go into that what that style is. But Sean and Zach are incredible rock climbers, and for that matter, every rock climber that I see in the relevant stages of high level climbing are incredible at what they do. But going back to our discussion about what Jon Cardwell was bringing up and like specific strengths, like but you need some specific strengths for the current comp scene. And I don't think we train that stuff. I don't think they train that stuff as much as those kids do. I don't think they study that stuff as much as the kids do. They're pretty damn close, and they look like they can hang on those, but they do look different. They do look a different level of like commitment and understanding and confidence on those movements that these kids just seem to have like a deeper understanding of. And I think
Uh,
that's the same
Dude,
case with the American woman.
that reminds me, before we go too far past it, you basically said something earlier about this web of knowledge and the training, like the meta for comp climbing at that level has been around now for a while, and the kids have gotten a chance to grow up on it. And it just, I
Right.
wanted to point out that if there's something that you are psyched on, you need to go out there and find it. And this is why every pro boulderer moved to Boulder, Colorado to climb on the Front Range. There was more V12 and up
Right.
hard outdoor boulders. And it's, if you want to be great at World Cups, actually, I don't even know where to move. If you're American, I don't know where to move, but let's just say clearly there are places. Actually, something you said when we did our Japanese podcast is you mentioned that Jongwon Chan lives in Japan. Is that true?
No, he's just there
Or
a
he just
lot.
visit? Okay.
I just saw him post a lot of the B pump boulders. He's there like all the time. It seemed
I,
like.
but I mean, that's just like case in point.
Yeah.
You want to get better, find that place to get better at. And I don't know if I have a good answer for where that is for
Dude,
stuff
he
like
by
this,
the
but
way, he also was finally in his finals again. He seemed to
yeah.
be a World Cup competitor who made a lot of finals back, 5 years ago with very consistent finalists. And then there was a couple of years where he like didn't even make semis like a couple of times, right? And then clearly, like I said, he's going to B pump all the time, like really studying that style, really working with the teams there, like really trying hard to send these boulders and really make sense of why he's not sending the boulders and then training in that way versus just getting your core ability stronger. Get your core ability stronger in what game you're playing, right? I think is a really, really important tactic in like comp training. But that takes a deep level of understanding in what comp climbing is. And to be fair, I do want to say that I think the American climbers do, in my opinion, look better than they ever have. But these guys are just better, right? And that's like, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think, there's any, I'm not shit talking like American guys or anything like that. But these guys are clearly better, and they clearly have had more training and like more of a core understanding of like what it takes to send these boulders and be confident in that style. And do I think I could do that right now? Like probably not with the facilities that we have and the setting knowledge that we might have. And I have no idea, but like it's clear that they're doing really well. I'm not saying that we're doing poor, but they are doing really, really, really well. And I think it's a mistake to not say that, right? Even as our own team, as everyone's federation, I think it's a huge mistake to say like, oh, but we're doing really well. It's like, no, like we could do better for sure. Like they clearly get it. Some kids clearly get it out there, and we should just like always be curious about what could be most optimal and better. And like, I think they just come from that place. Like, yeah, they have a deeper net for sure also, but maybe they just have more of an open mind and like how their training approach should be. And they go towards that way. I have no idea, but
Yeah.
like, it's a mistake not to say that they're doing really well and they clearly have a different approach and a different level of strength. But that's what it looks like in output, right? We can see it. We can see it
Yeah.
pretty clearly when you watch it, right?
Yeah, just objectively. Also, just I mean the
Yeah,
scoring. Just I mean
the
who's on the
scores.
podium and
Yeah.
who's not. I'm curious. We're talking about the training facilities or the training available and how that can really help craft amazing athletes. So when you were in Japan and you're saying, "Hey, look, Jong Won Chan is in B pump a lot." By the way, I'm a big fan of his. I don't know why. There's something about the way he
Oh yeah.
moves, or like I just really always liked him. It was cool seeing him back.
Yeah.
So we have like a training center in Salt Lake, and I know in B pump they have a comp wall. Like they have these hard ones on there. Do they have? Maybe you don't know. Do they have some kind of like? Is there some kind of special Japanese like training center where they're just building people like Sorato or Sorato?
I don't think so.
Is it
Dude, my
just a
first day
freaking
at B
B
pump,
pump? What the heck?
dude, at B pump, I walked in the elevator and Yoshiyuki walked in at the same time, like my first day there. And I think that's just where they climb, it's where they train. And dude, I told you, if I climbed at B pump, I would not climb anywhere else. I would not climb anywhere else, not
Yeah.
even outside. Like that's a place where I consistently could get stimulating rock climbs that made me feel like I needed to do better to send this climb. That's a really different thing than saying I need to get stronger to be able to stick this hold. That's a really, like, in my opinion, that's a mentality that gets you to like almost cheat it to say like, well, okay, I'll just go to the gym, versus like rock climbing is always something we can solve, right? Yeah, if you really have tapped out all of the different possibilities and you really tapped out how you're executing and operating on these moves and you still can't do it, maybe strength is a portion of it. But our mindsets as good rock climbers should always be challenged in, how do I do this? How can I get myself to do this? And almost through and through in every grade at B Pump, they just did a really good job of challenging me there. So do I think it's exclusive to that facility? Absolutely not. But they do a really good job, right? Like, I don't think our setting is as good of a job as consistently So that, it's going to amount to that. But do I think you need that? No, I just think that's really easy access. I think we can do a good job of setting our own boulders and like just throwing ourselves. It's clear that like, Chris Sharma didn't need like any gyms or anything to get super strong, right? He just like paid attention to what he was doing and, pushed himself in that way. Like I do think if we had appropriate spray walls, we could make it ourselves, but
Well,
just
I
takes a
also
lot.
I also think we're underestimating the the power of once you get the ball rolling and like
For
having that
sure.
community, because I think it's no big surprise that uh Brooke and Natalia are both amazing. You know that they are feeding off of each other. You know that Brooke sees Natalia get gold and she's like, well, I mean, I climb, I can get gold too. And then she does.
Totally.
So there's
Yeah.
something about that that I hopefully one of us can break through. One of us Americans can break through and
Oh
start
yeah.
that ball rolling. Just because it'd be fun to, I don't know. I want to see. I think it would get everyone here more psyched.
Yeah.
And I know it's not like I'm a super hardcore, like, yeah, go America. It's just, it's nice when
Right.
it's
Right.
someone, too. You're like, oh, I know that guy. Like, it's cool to see
Yeah.
your local kind of badass gym rat just all of a sudden do amazing. And you go, wow. It's inspiring where you go,
Yeah.
it's just like that thing I said, if they can do it, maybe I can do it too. And I like being around that.
Totally. Yeah, I want to bring up one thing that just hearing you bring up like having even Brooke go and clearly there's a difference in the physical level that we're just talking about, but something that I noticed is also just their poise. The confidence of climbers who do really well in those comps. It's not a surprise that everything I was talking about for how I train the youth climbers that I'm doing a training camp with is it's all in the head. Like everything we talk about is head game because the training is something you can do externally and yeah, you should be involved in stimulating rock climbing, but I think that watching Brooke do like some of her training in the States, like she's clearly doing a lot of board climbing, she's clearly just like working on her base level, but then she spends time just going for it and really sculpting like how her critical thinking process works and using that and leaning into it, because it's not like something that I also witnessed watching these World Cups was there's a lot of new moves, a lot of moves that it looks like these athletes have just like never seen before. Like you can kind of tell that they're like looking at it and they're like, like maybe this is the best way. And there's a difference between climbers who look at it and say, all right, this might be the best way, I'm going to go for it, versus, all right, looks like this is the best way and I'm for sure can do this. Right. And I think that's like them having the confidence to say, I for sure can do it this way, just has them approach the moves differently. I love what you said about, she was going to this one finish jug and she like totally caught it wrong, but managed to like reel it in. It's like, there you go. Like that's exactly what I'm seeing a lot more of is, you're rewarded for commitment, you're rewarded for pure fight, and you're rewarded for creativity. And those three things aren't necessarily exclusive to your ability. There's ability that matters a lot more, that matters a ton, but these three things are the things that make the difference between, I think, the winners. The climbers who actually win are the ones who have a really good time with their commitment, creativity, and pure fight, which is stuff that you can work on, and that you cannot necessarily work on just on the climbing wall, right? I think you have to work on those things maybe off the wall, just in your thought process. Like I really do think head game is the difference between people who win competitions and people who just are consistently strong in competitions.
Yeah, it always seems crazy to me to think about a guy like Zach or Colin Duffy and thinking that they're somehow vastly weaker than Tomoa. Like it just is not. You have seen these guys climb. You just know that it's not that they're just somehow weak, and that's what they need to do. Because
Mm-hmm.
boy, we create some very physically strong climbers, and yeah, it's fun to pick apart what separates them. And uh, let's use that as a segue to talk about some standout athletes that we saw throughout the season. And I mean, I also I kind of want to just mention that Yanya did come back and flash every single final. And I know you're fond of
That's amazing.
saying that she's not the goat, and I don't want to. Please don't
Oh,
rail about that. Other than just showing that, wow, it's. I also forgot how much I enjoy seeing her climb. Say what you want to about whatever, Yanya. I just think actually watching her climb is so fun. She is so dynamic, so powerful, so exciting, high commitment, high confidence. Uh, yeah, just she does look different than the rest of them, and that's fun, man. Just seeing Yanya do Yanya is an exciting thing.
yeah, no, I agree, dude. I think like all the stuff that I'm saying, I do think that Yanya is probably more of a standout precise competitor in her field relative to any of the guys that I think, because I do think that Sorato is clearly a dominant rock climber in the comp scene as far as a lot of the guys, but it's not, it's like pretty close. Like it's hard to tell, I think. But it's not that hard to tell with Yanya. Like sometimes it's like if she makes a mistake, she's not going to win. But if she doesn't win, she's probably going to get second place. It's what it feels like. And it's hard to say because she didn't do the entire season. And like, I think that's a lot of strategical steps on her end. I can't speak for that necessarily, but I do think that if we had seen her do the entire season, maybe it would have been a little bit more dramatic. And it's hard to say, but I do like, it's crazy that our hunch is that she would win every single one, right? And we can't say that about any single guy. So yeah, she is clearly the most dominant female, and that's fun to watch. That's really awesome to watch. Going back to my she's not the GOAT comment. I have high standards for what the GOAT is, like the greatest of all time. I guess my expectations are really high for like what rock climbers are capable of. So I see a lot of other climbers capable of looking like what we see Yanya as. That's like what my comment there is towards is that Yanya I still think can push more, and I think a lot of the other climbers can be where Yanya is right now. So seeing Yanya, 6 years from now, maybe 2 or 3, 4 years from now, I'm not sure. Like, I think she'd be a different level.
If she levels up
competitive
again,
climber.
if she does if everyone,
right.
if people push her to go to a whole nother level, and
Right.
it's interesting because she has called for more difficult boulders. It's interesting, like seeing her almost try to pull that out of the other athletes. And it makes me think, I kind of want to keep on talking about, athletes that really jumped out at you throughout the year, but it also makes me want to talk a little bit about how quickly things have changed and then where you think World Cups might go. And I agree with you where there's something that was really cool in the setting about it. Just didn't feel so wild. It felt more like climbing to me and less parkour. And I'm using those as like the super trope words that people used to critique climb. But there was some kind of difference that I noticed. So I don't know if you want to dive into that, we can. But if there's any other super standouts that you wanted to mention,
I just have to mention that I think I do think that Adam Ondra still has more GOAT title than Yanya does, and I think a lot of people wouldn't disagree with that. And he like went on to his one World Cup of the entire season, basically went to Prague and got second place. And it's like clear that it's like, dude, he's just had a kid. Like, he's not necessarily clearly focused on like comps as much, but just to like show up to one World Cup and just like get second place has to be a crazy testament to his ability, especially in like a style that's constantly changing. It must be extremely hard to show up and have that confidence. It just seems like it's in his blood to show up and be confident for rock climbing no matter what. And it's clear that just works. Obviously his base level was high.
Yeah, and admittedly, Andra's it's let's say bouldering World Cups are not really what I would say is Andra's natural strong point. It'd be interesting to see someone like Will Bosey. Yeah, like he's just been crushing it in the bouldering scene. Like, could he show up and do it? And my instinct is no. Or like Aiden Roberts. Is he gonna just? Clearly, those guys are incredible climbers on rock, and clearly Almondra is too. So, yeah. Okay, enough praise for Almondra.
With time, I think with time, those guys. With time, those guys for sure could, right? Yeah, but to assume that you would go do that right now is I wouldn't assume that ever.
One name that just kind of randomly I bumped into as I was watching was I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but she's a Chinese woman, Zilu.
Oh, Zilu.
Zilu. She was really good, and the reason why I find it interesting is you just don't see any Chinese climbers really. Like I feel like she's maybe one of the first Chinese climbers that has a lot of promise, and it's just kind of cool when you see a country, especially a country with a lot of people. I mean, my hunch is the Chinese are pretty good at lots of sports, so you would think that at some point they're going to be extremely good at climbing too, and so that may be interesting kind of thing to watch, that if there's a scene starting there. Thought it was kind of interesting.
Dude, I thought that was really interesting too, because it's not, you don't ever like see pictures or videos of like Chinese facilities or like, I mean, I'm sure they're fine, but like they don't stand out.
They're
right?
not that
and,
good. Yeah, I've talked
right.
to
them. And
you're great.
Exactly. And your question with like why we have facilities and stuff too, but they're not the same. Like the setting is a huge core part of what makes a facility good. And again, not to say our setting is bad setting. It's just like it's different setting for getting good at World Cup climbing. And I imagine that they don't really have that there. So it's clear that, that is one attribute of what makes these climbers really, really dominant. But is that the thing that gets them to the final? Clearly not, right? Like,
Mm.
obviously, Gilles Luo is a very good rock climber and very good at competition climbing, period. To get her to win, though, yeah, I do think that there's going to be a need of a different approach. And I'm just curious to see what happens over the next coming years. Like, there's, I was looking at this final result from Hachioji, Brooke Rabbatu with 3 tops, 4 zones, Hannah Mule with second place, 1 top, 3 zones, and everybody else didn't top a boulder. It's like when you top 3 boulders in a round and everybody else hasn't topped a boulder except one girl, it's like there's a clear difference, right? Like if topping boulders is the thing that counts the most, and even watching, like, it's hard to even see the exact result reflected correctly on the scores, right? But here, I think it was reflected much more accurately to what the scores were. Brooke looked that much more dominant compared to these other girls. So interesting. I think it's super, super interesting. And I think I'm just curious to see what it looks like over the years, because again, like I said, like we've been talking about, I do think there's a clear new wave, a clear new direction, which is why I was really excited to bring up World Cup this season, the World Cup bouldering season as a discussion topic for, the podcast, because I had a hunch that it would be a completely unique thing for comp climbing in the recent years. So and this is what I'm talking about. It's just like there's a new level, not just from the climbers, but from the setting, and it's clear. Something that I also said was when I was watching the men's. I had said, and for the girls as well, for them, but for the men's, it was the first time I think I was watching like a lot of climbs consistently and saying, I don't think I can do that. Like there was multiple times. There's so many climbs that I've watched over the years. I'm like, I could do that. I could do that. And then it's finally, I was like, wow, I really don't think I can do that. That looks really, really hard. And for the women, I think there's a lot of the climbing looks up to par to the level where they would say that, not sure if I can do that. It always looked like a lot of the women's field, a lot of the women's climbs over the last couple of years is like, it just seems like they could all do that. They're just not doing it versus like, I don't know, it seems like some of them just can't do it, and like, I definitely looked at a lot of the men's climbs and been like, yeah, I don't think I should make a World Cup final right now. It'd be pretty embarrassing. Like, I definitely need some training, and like but for me, that's a really good feeling to have, for as far rock climbing goes. Like, I want to push myself to get better and stronger.
Well, I'm just happy that the whole thing is heading in this direction. That's more fun to watch. New blood is coming in. The level is definitely up. I plan on watching next year's season more closely. I don't typically watch the lead climbing as much, but maybe I'll tune in a little bit more. I think bouldering typically puts on a better show, just like we were talking
Yeah.
about with the different media that's available and our attention spans. Um, but I guess, yeah, the 2 directions we can take this in to kind of wrap it up, Tim, is either there is where it's going in the setting, just kind of, are we seeing what's the trend we're seeing? Or I thought it was interesting, you pointed out how different each World Cup is and how there's just this different crew. There's a different vibe. It actually made me think of F1 again,
Mm.
there's each track is very different. Oh, and actually, just before we go on, I just want to point out, because we were talking about Sean Bailey, and we were earlier talking about how many 515s American sport climbers have done, and actually Sean's probably up there. I don't know his tick list, but he may be vying for one of those top spots of best American sport
Yeah,
climber of all
probably.
time. Yeah, he's done some hard stuff out there. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah.
Where should we take it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting to talk about route setting as a whole and like where route setting is going. I definitely think that American route setting has improved quite a bit in terms of like what competitions, quote unquote, should test climbers on. But I think it's clear to me that, the thing that I will say is it's clear to me that some setters have really, really figured it out. I think I really enjoyed watching these bouldering competitions. It really felt like to me, the winners were the winners. And that's pretty awesome to feel in rock climbing. It definitely does not feel like that, coming from experience in competitions. Definitely does not feel like sometimes I'll win a comp and be like, I don't know, like felt pretty close or like felt kind of lucky, like just the scores worked out a certain way. And it feels like that kind of vice versa. But it doesn't feel like that as much anymore. And it still feels, a little bit like, especially for qualification rounds, I think the American setting, I mean, it's a huge reason why I stepped away from competitions. I don't want to spend a lot of my effort and time doing a competition if I feel like the results, or honestly, just my opinions objectively seem like the results don't
Well,
reflect
one of the
the
things
strength in
that you
climbers. Or
yeah, one of the things that you flagged that you thought would be interesting to potentially discuss is this phenomenon where we have local climbers who are dominant and then they don't show up well on the international scene, and that says something
right,
about both just adjusting to that international style setting,
yeah.
and how it just doesn't seem like what we're selecting for here exactly matches up with what is being required on the World Cup scene. And I'd say this is a theme going back forever. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, forever.
dude, I what you just said honestly like just kind of struck me in a weird way, where I do think that's what like a lot of my guess is that a lot of something that I hear a lot is we're adjusting towards IFSC. We're adjusting towards IFSC. You know, like everything that our scoring system, our judging, our format, our style like goes towards IFSC. And I think that's a huge mistake. You know, because that assumes that we have a really good read on what IFSC actually is, which you may or may not, right? But then also like, why don't we just ask what we should test in rock climbing, period? Because I think that's what you're kind of speaking to, us talking about each venue being different, and like, yeah, there's like the top three in each field, but then the next three is always different from World Cup to World Cup. I think that's really interesting, and like it's clear that each area has its own meta style, right? And I think they just do a really good job of asking themselves in their local crew, like, what should we test rock climbers on,
Wait,
period, with these
yeah.
holes,
So
with these walls.
hold on, just because I want to get this straight, because when you're saying uh, talking about how we're as American sport climbing. God, sorry, I can't talk. I must be getting finally tired. That how uh, the U.S. is trying to align themselves with IFSC so that we create climbers and a selection that will excel in World Cups. And I thought you were going to say, and we're not doing a good job at it, clearly. But what you said is that that's the wrong way for us to think about it, because clearly uh, all these different comps that are going on, there isn't some absolutely dominant program we don't really know. We don't have a good read on what it takes to excel at these amazing levels. And so maybe it's wrong to just try to mimic the comps, or that there's some next level that we're not understanding. I don't know. Do you
I
see what
mean,
I'm
yeah,
saying?
totally. Yeah. I mean, the feeling that I've always been like angry or frustrated after a competition and been like, Josh, we got a podcast on competitions because I feel like they're not testing the right stuff. And he'd be like, whoa, like, that can come into it. But, I finally am like really believing in this now, where I do think that we just kind of go, a lot of us go about it the wrong way. And I say us because I was a route setter for a long time too. And like, questioned what I was even putting onto the wall, like, sometimes like, why am I doing this? Or even as a coach, or even as a rock climber like myself, training for these things, like, why am I doing this again? Like, what am I trying to improve? What ability, what strengths, and what techniques, what mindset am I trying to improve on? It's like whatever the IFSC is doing now. Like, we should just be questioning, like, okay, well, I've fallen on this in the past, and like this has been hard for me. I should just try to level that up. And if we focus on that more, like, we'll just be really creative. And like, and yeah, sometimes I think the level, we can gear it towards what we've been observing from IFSC. Like, okay, we see a bunch of slopers. Okay, we see a bunch of like coordination things. Well, we should just get creative in what that means to us, and I think lean in towards that way. I do think that amounts to like greater success most of the time, versus just trying to, like, I don't know,
I
pick
see.
and copy from the
So
past.
I'm just going to link it back to what you're saying about B pump and that whole Japan setting discussion that we had, and just that they're actually getting better at climbing. And then that argues that the World Cups are actually doing a reasonably good job now at finding out who the best climber is on that day. And that
100%.
it's okay. That's interesting. That's there's something deep there. And it kind of goes back into just all of our themes around learning how to really get deeply better at this sport, how to really master it, and that
Yeah.
there's no big tricks, and that what's going on in Japan, where they seem to produce more high quality competitive climbers than the rest of the countries, is that they're really diving deep into the form of mastery.
Yeah.
It's not just about putting up like a cool arete or something that you know
Yeah.
uh, shows them how to do it. Okay.
Dude, I get shit on for talking about this all the time too, because it's like assuming that we're, like doing something wrong or something. And like, it's okay. It's okay to like do something wrong, is like always been my mentality. It's like, we just go really hard in one way. And if we're doing something wrong, we should just catch it and, try to explore another way of thinking that could amount to more success, right? It's not even saying that the thing that we're doing isn't amounting to success, but it's clear that someone else has a different approach that amounts to more success. So maybe we can think like that, and as a federation, as a team, or like as your sole climber yourself, maybe we can broaden our thought process for how we can get better as rock climbers. Because it's like, yeah, we're talking about rock climbing competitions, and maybe a lot of you guys aren't going to be World Cup climbers, or maybe aren't even that interested in it. But to me and Josh, like Josh isn't going to go and compete in World Cups either. But like, I think what is interesting to both of us is just like understanding where climbing is going, and like what has provided success for rock climbers, and what in my opinion, or in his opinion, what hasn't provided success in climbers, or maybe our understandings, and just in my experience, like what has been quote unquote good and bad. This is always a hard discussion to have, and generally people get defensive about it. But again, I think that the approach here is just like, clearly something works, and like, and you have always said this thing about the comp climbers, where like, oh, it's just like they're really good at comp climbing or really good at parkour. You're saying that some people say that, and your response to that is, but they're pretty good at rock climbing too. Like when they go out and rock climb, they can just send hard climbs quicker, right? And we kind of had a discussion about that, and I'm like, yeah, dude, like they're just really good like at what they do.
Yeah.
And yeah, comp climbing consumes a huge part of everyone's year, if they're going to do that. So they don't have the time to like go out and do the rock climbs. And if they
That
did, though, I think they'd be pretty damn good at
No,
it.
that was just that. I'm glad you said that, because that's always was this big light bulb moment for me when people don't recognize that you're seeing them in this one discipline that looks different from yours, and somehow it makes you think that they're not that great at climbing. And then you
Right.
take Tomoa and he flashes V14, or whatever the case may be. They clearly are building something deep in this sport we call climbing, right? It's called climbing. It's not called just bouldering. It's not called just sport climbing.
Yeah.
There's a mastery there. And this is why we always are so impressed with someone like Adam Ondra, because and we really feel like he's a goat climber, because he can boulder
Right. Exactly.
V16, he can climb 15D, and he can win World Cups. And you say, this guy's tapping into something that is not just brute finger strength on granite. It's like, okay, yeah, but there's something a lot more deep that they're unlocking. And I think we should kind of wrap on that, Tim, because I think there's something. It's why you should care about comp climbing, even if you don't care about comp climbing, because like you were saying, your
Yeah.
pro tip was watch these people, because they're the best in the world at what they do. And if you can't learn from the best in the world at what they do, you're not paying attention.
Yeah. And don't assume that they're good because of X, Y, and Z. Kind of like what I'm doing. But I'm not assuming. I'm assuming based on my experience, and the things that I've seen and the things I've experienced as well. But yeah, don't assume why they're good. I think we should just ask why they're good, right? And really look
Mhm.
into it, really study it, and see like the difference. Because I think everyone's just kind of chugging along in the sport, and everyone's going for it 100%. And not everyone has it figured out. I think Adam Ondra might be one person to explain what his theory is on climbing, and like do a really good job of explaining why things led to what. But everybody else is kind of just doing it, right? So we have to make sense of watching it and seeing like why things amount to success and failure, right? I think like Mejdi, when he won a bunch of his first World Cups, was like super just stoked, but maybe not super cocky where he's like, yeah, of course I won, like, and I don't think Yanya's cocky necessarily, but I do think that she knows she's going to win. But it's interesting to see like a huge difference in those mindsets. And maybe Yanya's someone that I would pick her brain on, like why she's so dominant, and maybe she would have clear answers about that. But my hunch is that all of us should just lean towards that type of thinking, and we can all level up.
Yeah, that was a really interesting area you brought up during this conversation, was that there is no necessarily training facility that is the next unlock for you, for a country. It's about really diving deeper into climbing. And you basically echoed what you were saying, that you learned at B Pump and in Japan, where you were just blown
Yeah.
away by how they thought about learning climbing and using setting to unlock new skills and putting yourself into these new positions. So, uh, cool, Tim. I'm sure, whenever we click stop, we always come up with one more little area that we totally blanked on. But now we have the AMAs that we get to kind of expand on these topics that we've been talking about for the last month, and bring it into that recording we're going to do on, when did I say, Tim? It was Wednesday, July 19th. So everyone go join the LFG tier at patreon.com/testpiece. And yeah, tell us what you think about your journey to World Cup, and we'll help you get there.
See you guys on the next one.
Later, Tim.
See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Testpiece climbing, you can check us out at testpiececlimbing.com and even book a session with one of our coaches.